So you may be asking yourself, why do I still have this $500 Amazon PC in my possession? Well, honestly, it's for videos just like this one. This PC will work as a great test bench for something that I found on Amazon that I wanted to experiment with, but I was afraid to take the chance of ruining a good PC. So as you can see, we have the GTX 960 in it and this i5 2500K, and this is the exact setup that I had for the Modern Warfare Warzone 2.0 minimum spec test build. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take this custom DIY water-cooled kit that I got on Amazon for $90 that I was very skeptical about, but I wanted to try it out to see if it's actually worth the $90 that you spend on it, or if it's just gonna be a water hazard that could potentially brick your computer. Currently, I'm running just the Heaven benchmark to kind of get the temperatures up in the PC to see what they're currently running at. And as you can see, nothing's out of the ordinary. CPU's around mid 50s and the GPU's right at 70. So honestly, it's not anything that I'm concerned about, but just gonna have a good benchmark. So whenever we end up putting this water-cooled system together, maybe we can see some improvements, but I'm not really betting on a lot is gonna really improve, just as long as we don't end up having a lot of leaks. I've never done one of these, so I thought it would be kind of cool. So let's check it out. All right, so I've done quite a few videos with AIOs and they're very easy to install, but this setup is gonna be a little bit more complicated. All right, as you can see, we do have a couple of fans that are gonna go on the radiator. This comes with one piece of tubing that you have to cut into sections, some hardware, and honestly, everything else is just kind of in some pretty generic packaging. For $90, I'm kind of impressed with everything we have, as long as we can get it all set up and don't run into any issues. So as you can see, everything that we have laid out right now is going to be similar to what we're going to set it up in the PC itself. So the reservoir and pump will be mounted together. This will be mounted toward the front of the PC, out of the way, but also right below where the radiator itself is. So we'll connect these two to allow our overflow or our return back into the reservoir. This tube this will be basically into the CPU block, which will come out right down into the GPU block, which will come back around to our pump. So the whole loop will go from bottom into the GPU, into the CPU, through the radiator, fans will cool the fluid, back into our reservoir, and continue that cycle. Now that we've got everything kind of laid out, let's go ahead and start installing it. All right, so right now we're mounting these reservoir braces, these reservoir supports, and what I'm gonna end up doing, it does come with hardware to secure on the back side, but these holes right here are perfect for these fasteners to just kind of line up and thread themselves in. There's a lot of pressure on it, so these are very secure. I won't have any issues, and once we get that in there, these just kind of hold the reservoir in place to stabilize it. All right, so now that we've got our brackets in there, basically you just snap the reservoir in there. Honestly, it's pretty secure, and I'm not really concerned about trying to mount the actual pump itself to the back of the case. So what I'll probably try to do is, if I can just set it like that to where the weight of this whole setup is just kind of sitting on the basement of the case, then I'm totally good with that. I do have this back plate that came from another cooler. Yeah, I would not recommend mounting just the CPU plate and using the hardware to mount it to the motherboard. I could put a lot of weight on the motherboard and do some damage, so always use a back plate if you have one, and I'm sure you can get these online for very cheap if you needed a replacement. Now I am gonna go ahead and secure this on here. I know I don't have any thermal paste, I will go back and do that, but I just wanted to show the hardware that came with this kit does have some small little thumb screws that you can put on there and use for mounting. Just gotta make sure you do this in a pattern that makes sure and has it all installed evenly, so you make solid contact on that CPU. And once I do this with thermal paste, I'll maintain pressure here, and I will do these almost in a crisscross pattern to make sure that, like I said, we don't have any issues with one side having more pressure than the other. All right, so what I want to do is go ahead and remove these fans. I'm going to install the radiator at the top of the case, and then I'll mount the fans on the bottom side of the radiator, just so we can see those LEDs and make sure that everything does look good. But it'll also give us enough space to put between the reservoir and the radiator itself to make sure, like I mentioned earlier, we don't have any hard lines, hard kinks, or anything like that in our tubing. My only concern is mounting this stuff is going to be a very tight fit between the radiator fans and then the top of the motherboard. So hopefully I don't have any issues with like installing RAM or anything like that. All right, so as you see, we have everything just kind of hand tight on this. I will go through and snug all these up once we get ready to actually run our tubing. But we've got the CPU block on, radiator with the fans. We had just enough room to get our RAM in there. We've got our reservoir and our pump mounted. Now I am gonna go ahead and disassemble the heat sink and fans off of this GPU so we can go ahead and mount the CPU block. So let's see how difficult that's gonna be. Okay, so the same concern I had about not having a backing plate for the CPU is I will have to have a concern about this for the actual GPU itself. So what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to mount this hardware that does have these springs with it, has a little plastic washer to try to spread out the pressure that we're going to end up putting on this. But what I'm going to end up doing is running all of my hardware through and then trying to just secure our water block to it once we get it all mounted. All right, so with all the fittings that we got, like I said, I did just kind of do them hand tight. I'm just going to take this adjustable and just snug it up. I'm not worried about tightening these fittings to where I've got a lot of pressure on it, but honestly, I just want about a quarter turn just to make sure we've got a good seal. And like I said, I will do that to all the rest of them as well. All right, so what I'm gonna do before I end up using, putting clamps on these, I'm just gonna roughly try to do some of the runs of this tubing. Man, that is a tight fit. There we go. Gonna butt it all the way up against the back of the fitting, and I'm just gonna kind of do it to where I've got a little bit of excess. So I'll probably cut it about a 1/2 inch past this fitting just to make sure I've got enough, and I can always trim down. So that's what I'm gonna end up doing right now. Like I said, just trying to make sure I don't put too much pressure on anything or take the chance of putting a kink in this hose. Okay, so now we have everything set up and we're ready to go ahead and fill this thing. Now, I know that a lot of people are going to comment on this and say you shouldn't use antifreeze, but we got some green antifreeze. The reason I'm going to go with this is because I am going to dilute it quite a bit, but I wanted a little bit of that green color to match this cable extension that I just had laying around. And I think with the green fluid in the cables and the blue fans, it will look really, really good. But honestly, this thing isn't anything that I'm looking to use long term. Doing a little bit of reading, antifreeze can eventually slime up and gum up a little bit, but it does have some anti-corrosive properties, and I think it'll just look cool. And like I said, this thing isn't going to be anything I'm going to be using long term. So I also had a plan of potentially doing a couple of videos with different fluids, different household items that would potentially cool a PC. So if you have any ideas, please feel free to drop them in the comment section below. I would greatly appreciate that info. But now it's time to fill this thing up. We're going to dilute this down with distilled water so we have everything that we need on hand. So let's go ahead and try not to make a huge mess and get this thing filled up. Okay, so now what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to have to flush the system out. The antifreeze did not seem to want to flow without causing a lot of bubbles, so I'm going to run some distilled water through it. I'm going to dump it out again, and then I'm going to try one more time to fill it up, and hopefully we have a little bit better result from just using distilled water. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, like I said, without any instructions, I'm not sure which side is actually supposed to have the fill port and which is supposed to be the return, so I'm honestly going to change these back to see if this makes any difference. Because it seems like what's happening is my return's coming down and causing a lot of air bubbles, which is causing a lot of air bubbles from the pump. So I'm going to swap these two and see if, like I said, that just kind of reduces that. I'm not worried about drying everything until I know that I can get this thing full without having any excess water. Because at this point, the GPU, the motherboard, everything has water on it. So as long as I'm powering just the power supply, the fans, and the pump, then I'm good to go with that. So it does seem to be working a lot better. So that was just a mistake on my part. So there is a little bit of air trapped in the reservoir, but we'll let it run for a little bit. And it does seem to have quietened down quite a bit without all that air being pushed through it. So right now I'm going to let it just run for a minute. Everything seems to be going good. I will get something to dry everything off and make sure we don't have any moisture left into it. I'll kind of move it back and forth to see if there's any air trapped in the radiator itself, and hopefully it'll be good to go. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this thing on. Like I said, we're going to let it run for a little while and just kind of work some of those air bubbles out. Allow this thing to dry. The GPU got really soaked underneath that top plate and everything, so just want to give it a chance to kind of dry up so we don't end up ruining any parts. And then we'll go ahead and power it on and see what kind of numbers we get. I'm not really going to be surprised if it doesn't really change much, because honestly, this thing was not running high to begin with, but it would be cool to see if we had any improvement. So let's just let it work itself out and we'll be right back. All right, so we did let it run for about an hour to try to get as much air as possible. I do know that these things sometimes take a little bit to get all the air bubbles out, but we're not too concerned about that. What we're going to do right now is we're going to power it on. We've got everything hooked back up and hope that we got all the water off the GPU, power supply, motherboard, anything like that, and don't have any issues. So moment of truth, let's see what we got. All right, there we have it. So I do have the side panel off, but honestly, it does run a little loud. So I don't know what it's going to be like with the side panel on. I'll try to get some audio so you can see what everything sounds like, but hopefully it's just resetting. I don't know what happened. Okay, now that we're back, only thing I did was unplug the SATA cable off the SSD and plug it back in. So hopefully we don't have that issue again. I don't know why it had done that. There was some water on the SSD. I did have to pull it apart and dry that off earlier, but I don't know why this just did that. So now we do have everything back up and running. Let's see if if everything performs like it should. Like I said, I'm just gonna run the Heaven benchmark to kind of compare the temperatures to what we had prior with the stock cooler and the factory heatsink on that 960. So let's see what we got. All right, so there we go. We actually turned this zero into a hero with this DIY water cooling kit. I'm very pleased with the way it turned out, and now I feel more comfortable doing something like this on a higher end PC. Now, you did see that the temps dropped significantly. This 960 isn't really a high performance card that's gonna put out a lot of heat. So I would be curious to see what it would do to a more higher end GPU, but I still think I'm a little timid to try it out just yet. But who knows, maybe in the future we can get a hold of something that's a little more advanced and that we're willing to take a loss on if for some reason it does happen to do that. But I'm very pleased with this kit for $90. Can't beat it. So thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you think, and like I said, if there's some kind of fluid or something you would like to see in this, I would like to try out some different solvents, maybe something like trying antifreeze again to kind of do a comparison. But like I said, I've had a lot of fun with this, but feel free to like and subscribe. Let me know what you think below, and I'll catch you next time.